Welcome back to Casey's Treasure Corner. I got a pretty decent story for you tonight. It's a site I worked on in 2009 out in New Mexico in the Sandia Range. I was out there looking for a lost Spanish silver mine and figured I had a couple, I had some free time off, so gathered up some camping gear and some climbing gear and sleeping bag, a tent, and I flew out to Albuquerque, rented a truck, figuring I'll go out into the mountains and try to find this Spanish silver site. Never know. Maybe I can find some old silver in there. So I flew out there. I rented a car, a little truck, and off I went out into the field. I stopped at a Walmart, got all kinds of food, some Mountain House, and some water, and just the basic necessities I didn't have to fly with. And I was ready to go. So threw it all in the truck, and I had some directions to an old mine site I was trying to find that was established about pre-war, about 1944. It was in the Sandia mountain range, and it's pretty much illegal to do any mining there any longer. It's in a wildlife zone or national forest. But I figured, if the mine is open and exploring it wouldn't hurt anything. So I took off and I followed the map that I had, this old mine map from about that time frame. And the road, I came off the main road and then out across the wash and onto a back trail that was totally overgrown. And it came in and out of the mountain, would come up on the little side of the hill, and then it dropped back down to the wash. And it was doing that for a little while. And then I finally got to a spot in this wash where the truck wasn't going to go through there. I mean, maybe it could go through, but it was a rent-a-car and I didn't want to take the chance of being stuck there. So I just parked the truck off to the side and packed up my gear and headed out on foot. I only had like 3/4 of a mile to go. It wasn't terrible. So I packed it all up. It's probably about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I started hiking down, the rest of the way, following this trail around. Eventually the trail kind of cuts into the wash, and then I'm walking through the wash and it kind of disappears. I don't know where the trail is, but I do have a GPS with me, so take out the handheld and try to get a position on where I am. And this mine should be relatively within 150 feet of where I was. So I look around and look all pretty much for like another hour. I look all over the place for this mine, and I can't find it to save my life. There's no tailing piles, there's nothing to indicate the mine was there. And I'm figuring, well, I must have missed it somewhere, or maybe somebody covered it up, or I just don't know what the hell happened to it. But, I wasn't too discouraged. I, took out my map and I went to my second alternative, which was about maybe another half a mile further north of this location. And I figured, well, I'm already here. Might as well, continue on walking another half mile and see if the other place is open, because it was supposed to be up on the side of a hill off the creek. And, and it would have went down, portal would have went in and then to a shaft that would have went down about 50 feet into a bunch of different levels, according to this old mine notes. So that was pretty intriguing. So I set out for that. I started walking back up the wash, and it's a wash. It's full of boulders, and the water course goes all over the place, and the landscape was absolutely beautiful. It was just it's a little cold. It was still spring. Had a cool breeze in the air, and snow in the mountain caps up there. Gorgeous, just gorgeous scenery. It was just so nice to get out. And I'm hiking along, no problem. And I start getting close to the area where I think I'm supposed to be. I'm looking at the GPS, and according to the GPS, I'm within 75 feet of this place. So I start looking up on the sides of the wash and further down the wash and keep walking, and I catch a little glint of sunlight, like bouncing off a mirror or reflecting off something down the wash further. So as I walk closer to it, it looks like it's a vehicle. And I'm like, how did the vehicle even get in here? Because there's just no road to get in here. And this wash is, pretty wide, and it opened out to the north side. So the highway would have been about 10 miles away from that side. But as I walk closer to this glinting light, I see that it's a little vehicle. It's a Suzuki Samurai. And it's been maybe pushed into the wash and kind of buried there, maybe in a flash flood. And as I get closer and closer to it, there's a guy inside in the car. And, now I get up to the car, and he's got the window down. He's just sitting in there. He's an little old guy. I think he was in his 70s. He wasn't very well prepared. He had been stuck there for 3 days prior to me showing up there. And, his truck was stuck right up to the frame. It wasn't going anywhere. And he said he had ran out of water about 2 days ago. And he just didn't have the strength to walk all the way back out to the highway, which I was correct. It's about 10 miles out to the highway. And there was just no way the old guy was going to make it. So he stayed there, hoping that his family would come, realize he was missing, and then they would come looking for him. But he said he only told one person he was coming into that location. And he wasn't sure if the person would come find him. So that ain't good. So... with that, he, hasn't had water in 2 days. So I hand him a couple bottles of water, and, he's so thirsty, his lips are dry, and he's cracked and parched and hungry. He takes a big, gulp of like a 16-ounce water. He drinks like 3/4 of it in one shot, and then he just threw it right back up instantaneously. His body just really couldn't handle all that water in one shot. And, from there... I had plenty of water with me, probably about maybe 8 16-ounce bottles. And, so he, calms down and, starts drinking a lot of water slowly. And I offer some food. I have candy bars and snacks and Mountain House, a couple nights worth. I always carry 2 or 3 when I go out because you just never know. So he was pretty hungry. After a while, the sun's starting to get setting and it's getting a little chilly, so I set up my tent right next to his truck and try to find a little flat spot in the wash there. I have a sleeping bag, and his car still has gas in it, so he's sleeping in the truck at night, just turning the heat on when it gets icy cold out. So he decided he'll stay in the truck, I'll stay in my tent. And the next morning we get up, and, he's, feeling much better. He had the food the night before and water. He's pretty well hydrated now. And, but his truck is stuck there. There's just no way we're going to get it out of there. I don't even know how we're going to get it out of there when we get out of there. But, I told him my truck was about 2 miles back the other way, and, I would take him out of there, and then we'd come back and figure out how to get his truck out of there. So he agreed, and, we started walking back to my truck, and he was so thankful that, I think that there was just a divine intervention. There was just, what are the chances of going out there, looking for something, not finding the first site, going out, finding the old man, and it's stuck in his truck in a wash, and, nobody knew where this guy was. So we finally get out to my truck, and he gets in, and we drive out of there, and I ask him where he needs to go, and he tells me, and we go, a couple towns away, maybe 15, 20 minutes away, to his house. And we get to his house, and his wife is there, and she's like super worried about him. Apparently she wasn't the one he told where he was going. But she was just super worried and hadn't called the police yet at that point in time. But they were so thankful to have him back home, and they invited me for dinner, and of course I stayed for dinner. She made some burritos, and they were very good. And as we stood around talking after dinner, he said, I want you to have something that I think that you're going to benefit from it more than me. So with that, he pulls his gun down off the rack in his living room. And it's like a big old... Sorry, there's a plane flying overhead. There's a big old, like a musket ball gun. It's got a big barrel, shotgun type barrel on it. It's, weird. It's got it's like hexagon shaped barrel on the outside. And it's all kind of rusty, and it didn't look like you could ever fire it. It was more like a wall hanger type of thing. And he takes it down off the wall, and he hands it to me, and he's like, look down the barrel. So when I look down the barrel, I see there's a piece of paper in there. He's like, pull it out. So I stick my finger in there, and I grab the end of this paper, and it's a roll, and I pull it out of the barrel. And as I pull it out, he starts to explain to me this story about this map and the gun barrel. He said years ago when he was hiking around, probably 40 years ago, because he was about 40s, that when he was hiking around in the mountains, he had come across a guy who was purportedly, the guy was one of the guys who worked on the atomic bomb at Sandia National Laboratories. And this guy said that he had found a Jesuit treasure of silver and gold in bags of, like leather satchels that were in this cave in the Sandia Range, in like sitting on a ledge in the back of this cave. And he had wandered in there inadvertently. When he saw the cave, he saw some petroglyphs near the cave. And he went up to inspect the petroglyphs, and he saw the cave opening. And he climbed inside, and when he got inside, it was like a small opening to get in. Then there was like a 6-foot space that he could stand up in, with a small tunnel in front of him, about 20 feet long, maybe only 3.5 feet tall. He had to crawl through that tunnel. He said he crawled to the back of the tunnel, and it was another room. And then that room had this silver and gold in bags, and these leather satchel bags, and some church goods like crosses and cups and bowls that you would see in a church. And they were all sitting in this back of this thing, and he was just oogling at it. He was in awe that he had found this treasure. And he had come, he came back out of the cave, and when he got back outside the cave, the Indians were waiting for him. And the Indians, basically checked him all over, checked his backpack, and asked him what he was doing there. And he said, he was just hiking around, and he happened to inadvertently stumble onto this cave, and he saw the petroglyph, and he went to inspect it, and, here he is. And the Indians didn't really like that answer. Accordingly to the old man, they said, the old man said that the Indians beat the guy to within inches of his life and told him never, ever come back here again. Now, that guy, he was a demolitions expert for White Sands, working on the detonation mechanism for the atomic bomb. So, that's pretty significant. And that guy gets pretty pissed off. So he goes back, sneaks back in there with explosive and blows the place up. But he makes this map first of the site, and he puts it in this gun barrel, and he hides it. He hid the gun barrel in another mountain range with instructions to his friend, in case he ever disappeared, that he would find these instructions to get back to this cave in this gun barrel. And that person that he had bestowed that information upon was the old man's father. So the old man, like I said, now he's in his 70s, and I was trying to figure out the timeline of when that was, and this was in 2009, and he was 70 back then. So I'm not sure exactly when his dad died, but his dad is the one who had the information, and eventually found the gun, with the map in it, and then passed it on to his son. And his son was already 70 and still looking for the place, but knew the general area. And he gave me the map, and I opened up, this map, and it had all these. It had like basically a picture, a bird's eye view of the mountain range, drawn on there, and it had some distinctive marks on it that showed you where to go, and some very distinctive notes in there. And the two notes that stuck out the most were: look for the petroglyph, look for a rock that looked like a woman from the 50s who had one of those big hoop skirts on, and next to her would have been a giant tree that had fallen over. Half of it was broken off and in the creek, but it had broken or snapped off like 20 feet up in the air, and the tree was supposed to be, big enough that 4 people holding hands around it would basically be the circumference of it. So I'm thinking to myself, like, well, how hard could that be to find? It's especially if the guy gave me an area now that kind of narrows the playing field. So the guy let me take, basically notes of the map and take pictures with my cell phone, which back in those days was a flip phone, and it didn't take great pictures, but I took enough pictures to at least have it ingrained in my head. And I thanked the man, and he said that he was going to get his kids to help him go get his truck out. And, I left him. And now just all filled up with like excitement because I wanted to go back and find this location. And since I was going out hiking anyway, it was a perfect opportunity. So I went back to the Walmart, got some more water and some more Mountain House, and headed off into this location. And, fortunately there was a road that took me almost all the way there. I was pretty shocked. It was a perfectly good road and took me right into basically a parking area where tourists go, or people go in to hike and stuff. And I started following these directions. And I hike into the backside of the Sandia mountain range, and I'm just kind of following a trail that's there, taking note of this map and looking at the cell phone camera, and I'm looking at a screen that's like a postage stamp. Didn't have zoom back then, so I'm looking at this tiny little thing with a magnifying glass, and I had a loupe with me where I look at rocks and stuff with. So I'm looking at the map, and then on one portion of that map, it had like a little section of words that said something about a spring in the creek. And so I went back to the topo map and looked at the area I was in, and there was only one creek with a spring in it. So I'm like, well, it's got to be around that spot. So I hike up to where this creek and spring are, which is about, not far from where I am, maybe about 150 yards. And I hike up there and I start looking all around the thing. And I don't see anything that looks like a rock, or a rock shaped like a woman in a big hula skirt, and or this tree. And it's got to be next to the creek, because the guy says that the tree was snapped off 20 feet up in the air, and the other half of it laid across this creek. So, I'm figuring, shit, it's, even the tree stump still got to be there, and the rocks didn't go anywhere. So if I can find the rocks and the tree stump, I'd be all right. Well, I looked and looked and looked and looked and looked, and I couldn't find nothing. So I camped that night, and next morning I got up early, and I climbed up to the highest peak in that area that I could find, so I could look down on the location. And it was a wonderful thing, because by the time I got up there, it was already starting to get warm, and it was probably only like 10 o'clock in the morning. But I got up on the top of this ridge, and I looked down, and, lo and behold, I'm like, oh my God, there's the tree. I could see the top of this broken off tree and the bigger part of it laying across this dry wash. There was no creek there at this time. And that was only like, maybe 300 or 400 yards from where I was. So I went back down, and I kind of packed up all my camp gear and whatever, and I started walking towards this giant tree that I saw from up on top of the mountain. And I get there, and I'm amazed. I'm like, oh my God, this has got to be it. I look at the tree, and I see that it's broken off, and it's, I go up, I hug the tree. I'm barely making a dent. I need 3 more people to get, wrap our hands around it. I'm like, this has got to be it. I look around, and about 30, 40 feet up to the right, there's this giant rock that's round, almost perfectly smooth, with another little rock on top that makes like the head. So it's like the head, and then the woman's skirt becomes this big round boulder on the bottom. I'm like, that's got to be it. It's got to be it. And then I start looking at the surroundings around it, and the bedrock, I actually see the petroglyphs on the rock. And when I walk up to where the petroglyphs were, there was, you could see the depression in the ground, because according to the guy and the old man, that the hole to access to get into the first room of this location was right in front of the petroglyph. Now, what I learned later was that the BLM came in and covered up all these holes, later on, that they didn't want people going into these holes and snakes going in there and people getting hurt. So they just covered up all these purported mine sites and backfilled them. And right in front of those petroglyphs was this giant little, I say giant, but it's, probably a depression in the ground about 2 feet down and maybe 3 foot around-ish, right around that. But you could tell that it definitely had sunk in. and there was a serious depression there, and then this rock mass that stuck out of the hill with the petroglyph that was the sign for a treasure. It had 2 crosses on it, and a being or a creature of some sort. It looked like a priest with his arms raised up in the air, and underneath of that came 2 lightning bolts off each hand that went to one cross on one side, and on the other cross there was another cross there, but there was a little mark above the other cross, and that would normally denote that that area was a trap. And when you come around the corner, up and around the corner, there was a little hole there, but someone had sprung the trap already. The boulder that would have held up on the ceiling had already collapsed in and fallen in the hole. And I tried to dig around it and move around it and look around it, but I couldn't see a thing. The boulder just covered everything, and there was no way I was going to move that. But right there, behind that pile of boulders, and 20 feet back, I guess, into the hill, is that Jesuit silver site, and it's still there till this day. It's as much as I wanted to go in there and dig it out, you can't mine in there. It's a national forest, and if you get caught in there digging, you're going to go to jail. So I put that on the bucket list and figured, okay, someday maybe I can make a deal with the government and get back in there, and maybe they'll let me recover this treasure. Really wouldn't make too much mess. It shouldn't be too hard to actually get back in there at all, considering the depression and what the guy said. I mean, that depression probably would only have to be cleaned out about 6 feet, and then it should go back under the rock into this another chamber where you can actually stand up, and then it would be 20 feet of crawling to the main chamber, which would be up and back and buried in the hillside. So, I guess the point of the story was, I never would have found that location, never would have, saw this guy or anything if I didn't go out and do some prospecting. And, just because I know where this treasure is doesn't mean I can recover it. So not every treasure is recoverable, and, thankfully I got there in time to get the guy out of there, because I don't know if the guy really would have lived, if he had to be stuck out there 4 or 5 days. Only one person knew where he was. So you should tell more people when you're going off into the middle of nowhere, and everybody kind of knew where I was. Not that they could have found me, though. My family is in Florida and New York, and I was out in New Mexico by myself. So if the same thing would have happened to me, God knows, I'm a little more resourceful and probably would have climbed out of there eventually. But you just never know. So. With that, I'll leave you guys with that for tonight, and I hope you enjoyed the story, and, well, I'll see you next week. Casey's Treasure Corner. Have a good night. Bye-bye.